So we have our fifth in our series of books of the Bible in 5 minutes. This is going to be Deuteronomy. It's the fifth book of the Bible, and Deuteronomy is really Moses' farewell speech. The Israelites are about to enter the promised land. This is the fulfillment of the promise. Moses has been leading them through the wilderness, and here at the end of 40 years, they're going to enter into the land, fulfill the promise, and it will conclude with Moses' death. And it's really a sermon that he's given. He's urging the people not to repeat their mistakes as they take over the land. And he's urging them to trust God, to trust God's faithfulness. In chapter 1, we see God fulfilling the promises that were made to the patriarchs back in Genesis, where God promised Abraham that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. And here we have these numerous descendants, and they're about to go into the land. But they're going for a reason. In chapter 4, we get the purpose of their going in, that their worship of God might attract others, that the way they live, that God's presence there, God's faithful presence, would be a witness to the surrounding people. Which harkens back again to Genesis 12, when God says, "In you all families will be blessed." So the idea again is that Israel will be a blessing. In Deuteronomy 5, we get a restating of the 10 Commandments, but then it goes on in chapter 6 to the greatest commandment. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. When Jesus is asked to sum up the law, this is what he states. And it's so important because I think you can get the conception that the Old Testament is these people woodenly following the rules, and the New Testament is kind of this law of love. But here in the Old Testament, we have talking about the relationship between the people and their God as one of love, and the people are following the law because they love God with all their heart, with all their soul, with all their might. And Moses is urging them to remember. To remember when things are going well, do not forget God's blessings. To remember all that God has done. To not be afraid of what is to come. To remember all that God has done. To trust that God will continue to provide. Remember, this is almost an entirely new group of people. Only Caleb and Joshua go through the entire 40 years and enter the promised land. So some of these people would not have been alive when God rescued the people from Egypt. So Moses is urging them to remember, to remind them of what God has done. And they're not being given the land due to their righteousness, it says in chapter 9. This is unmerited grace. Again, picked up in the New Testament, right? Where faith is a gift. Where the gift of Jesus Christ, it's an unmerited grace that we receive. So again, this is one story, Old and New Testaments. In chapter 10, it talks about circumcision of the heart, called to love God, to love the sojourner, the foreigner. And so again, it's calling us to a life where we follow the law. In chapters 12 through 26 are specific covenant reminders, but it's a conviction to put it on to be a heart-filled faith. In chapter 28, there are these blessings and cursings. Reminds me of Psalm 1, where it talks about the consequences of our choices. Chapter 29, there's this renewal of the covenant, where Moses is reminding the people of God's faithfulness, where he says their clothes haven't worn out in all of their desert wanderings. And in chapter 30, there's this choice. Moses is setting life and death before the people, and he's urging them to choose life, that their faith will be this active, everyday choice. Choose life, he says. And it goes on in chapter 31 where Joshua is chosen as the successor to lead the people. And he's to read the law every 7 years. Moses is 120 years old at this time. I can only imagine how tired he would be after all this time. Chapter 32, we get Moses' song, this praise to God, where Moses lifts up these parental aspects of God caring for the children. And there's also a warning about what happens if the people are disobedient, if they are unfaithful. In chapter 33, there's this final blessing on the tribes, and then in chapter 34, we have the death of Moses. He's been a leader for 40 years, and then the ascension of Joshua, who will be the next leader as the people enter the land, fulfilling the promise.